Hey everybody, time for the Surf and Turf Show. Hey everybody, and welcome to another week's episode of the Surf and Turf Show. With me as always is my friend Adam. Adam, how are you doing today, man?
You know, the usual running about for the kids here and there. Um,
How bad is the zone defense
it's
today? Let's see
it's
it.
all
What's it looking
right.
like?
So let me I'll run this by you, see what you think. My son has been, we talked about the helmets, hard to get him on the helmets. He's doing wheelies, like destroyed his back tire, just shredded it. We tried to do a inner tube patch, for it, did not work, shredded that. So I went and I got a new tire and inner tube today. My thought is I'm just gonna have him come home and just be like, here's the tools, good luck. Here's YouTube, watch some tutorials. Cause I want to see what he can pull off on his own. What do you think?
I think that's an amazing idea. I like because it's win-win, right? One way he succeeds, he crushes it. One, he fixes the tube, he gets all the confidence that come with that. Also, you don't have to do anything, which means that you would bought back the time that you would have spent fixing
Even
that
better.
tire yourself,
Yeah.
which is amazing. And if he fails, well, then, hey, he gets a little bit of humility. He comes back and you get that kind of dad stance of like, okay, well, let me now show you how we do it. And that's great. I mean, that's win-win.
That's
Points
true.
on the
All
board.
right, good. Right on.
That's so amazing. That we had a moment like that when my son went and got car insurance. So my oldest kid had to go out, get insurance. We just moved back from Europe. He had to go out and get his license. So he's like, okay, moving out on my own, gonna leave the house, want to go get some insurance. It's like, okay, well, I'll put you on as a writer on my policy. We'll work through that. He's like, no. I'm going on my own, Dad. I really want to step out. I want to get my own insurance. I want to be totally distinct. I don't want this to be, part of something you do. Like, okay, I can admire that. I think you're missing some data though. So let's get on the phone with the agent. Let's just talk this through. And so I call the company. I'm like, okay, quote me what it would cost to add him to my policy. Silly, right? $300 a month. Short answer to add one person to my policy. And he's already kind of sweating now. He's like, oh, whoa.
But it's not just one person, right? It's a 19-year-old, male.
That's right. It's adding the highest risk person in the entire universe to your policy. Like, demographically, there's no chance that we're not going to have to buy you a new car this year. So I get their stance on it. But then we basically, I'm like, okay, now talk to the agent. I'm like, hey man, I want you to just stop. I want you to talk to my son. Let him talk to you through his. I want you to go and quote him independently. He's like, okay, yeah, too easy. And so he goes through the whole rigmarole, answers all the questions. Guy comes back $600 a month. He's like, oh. I think he threw up in his mouth a little bit. He's like, I would be happy to write a new policy, Dad. I'm like, okay, see, win-win. Win-win. You got the experience of kind of figuring out what that looks like. And then you also got the experience of knowing that, hey, we're still here to support you. So you're not all the way on your own. So we will be good. We'll take care of you.
So that's actually a great segue to talk about what the challenges that Gen Z are facing today.
Completely agree, man. That is it is good because when you math that out, you're like, okay, that's $7,000 a year in insurance. So basically, you're saying, I'm going to buy you a car. Like, insurance company is planning to buy you a car once a year. Like, it's a lot of money for the privilege of driving. But yes, the Gen Z topic. I think we need to hash something out first, though, because I think we talk across each other a little bit on this. Because we kind of disagree, I think, on where Gen Z starts. So let me tee it up to you first, man. Where do you see Gen Z? What's the cut line, and kind of how do you define that transition from millennial to Gen Z?
So let me, I'm going to get Gene Twengy here. But what I did want to bring out is the gap within Gen Z, because I think there's kind of old Gen Z and young Gen Z. And I've seen people distinguish it before, if you were in high school during COVID or if you'd graduate high school, basically. So kind of 2020-ish is the cutoff. So the older Gen Z has had kind of a qualitatively different experience than the younger Gen Z. And then now, obviously, we're into alpha. So, all right. So Jean Twenge, she just wrote this sweet book on generations. So she's defining Z as born 1995 to 2012.
Okay, 95 to 2012. So that's class of 13 from high school-ish. Is that accurate? It would be the beginning of that. She would say class of 13 would be the first one. That's 95.
Yeah, that makes
10
sense.
years, another 8 years. Yeah, 13. Okay. No, I'm just thinking in that terms because I take a different stance on it, right? So I look at a Strauss and House generations book. Like for me, that's one of the huge formative generations discussion or I guess paradigms on generational thinking that I've kind of run through. And I think they would put it and say that most of what she's describing as Gen Z would be late millennial. So they would say that millennial is going to start somewhere around 1981 plus or minus birth year. And so it would be class of 99, class of 2000. And then they would say all the way up through the fourth turning of zero.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's the later version of, or the follow-on book to their generation's book. But they would say, I think millennials would start with class of 2000 and then end. And this is where I'm going to draw the end. They haven't said this. I'm thinking end with 2020, end with class of 2020 high school. Um, and so they would split millennials within that and say that we've got early millennial, late millennial, kind of like with the Gen X, you had what they call Atari Gen X and Nintendo Gen X, right? You had some kind of like children of the 70s, children of the 80s. They would say that the millennial generation would be split into kind of the earlier millennial and the late millennial. And there's a lot of things you could suss out there with like social media exposure, internet exposure at what age. But I really like that divide. But the reason I like it so much is I think that graduating class of 2020 and the impact that COVID in particular had on that graduating class's social life was so huge that to me, it that will become the divide as we look back between whatever you call those two generations, the one from the other. So I'll call it millennial and Gen Z. I think maybe you'd call it more like Gen Z and Gen A.
Yeah, so I view my two youngest kids as Gen A, and they were born in 2013 and then 2020. So I think that they're both considered Gen A.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think really the distinction is whether or not you think a generational cycle is more like 10
Yeah.
years or 20. And I think authors could take different perspectives on that. You could have more generational cycles with more names if you went 10 by 10 than if you went 20 by 20. But really, we're talking about the same thing. So I guess when I say Gen Z, what I really mean is post class of 2020, the kids who had their proms and sports ruined by COVID. Because to me, that was kind of this huge social signal of, hey, we are willing to sacrifice kids' good for good of the older folk. And I think prior to that, you could argue that it was mostly the paradigm was inverted, where mostly the kids were 100% the focus through like the entire millennial parenting cycle of saying, no, that's their prime. They are the number one focus in our lives is taking care of the kids and kind of raising the kids. And then past that, to me, that was the first crack that I saw, the first time that I really saw welfare of kids sacrificed on behalf of society. That's totally me drawing that. That's not anything that I think's out there in fact, but what do you think about that distinction?
Yeah, so first of all, any discussion of COVID is very there's just a lot of like big feelings involved, right? I think because if you were against, if you're against lockdowns and vaccines, you think everybody was, running like lemmings into this other, into this groupthink. And then if you're on the other side, you're looking at the anti-vaxxers saying like, you're crazy, this, that, and the other, right? So and I think there's a lot of, there were a lot of miscalculations about the whole thing that like we don't really need to like get into for the purposes of talking about Gen Z here. But I think people still are like salty. Some people want to forget the whole thing, which I think is kind of on a par with like if you read that the Great Pandemic book, it's on a par with like the 1920 pandemic. Like people just want to forget it because I think people did the best they could, but they I don't know if there's like a perfect way to like navigate that whole situation, right? But yeah, so I think what we see with the COVID lockdown is an acceleration of other trends. And then our institutions are kind of like revealed as I think maybe the decay was easier to like kind of paper over before that, but then like the tide came out and like nobody was wearing clothes and then it looked you know and there was some unpleasant sights there. So I think yeah, definitely that caused like a kind of probably a paradigm shift in a lot of people.
And so I agree. One, we could do a whole episode on what we thought with the pros and cons of COVID, and maybe that would be fun. Maybe it wouldn't. But in this case, I would say mostly the point is moot whether or not you think what we did was appropriate or just, went poorly but was well intentioned, or whether you think it was totally malintentioned from the beginning. It doesn't matter in this case because to me, the data point that, hey, man, these kids really kind of got dragged through the dirt in terms of quality education and quality of socialization during that couple of year period. And so to me, whether it was for a good reason or it wasn't for a good reason, it was interesting for me to see kids really getting, kind of sacrificed that way to like, no, you're not important enough for this to matter. We're going to cut what you're doing because this is more important. And again, whether you think that's appropriate or inappropriate, it was still, it shocked me. Like it surprised me because that had not been the tone of the prior really since I was a young adult in terms of like how we handled children. And so I think it was an interesting cut line to what you're saying about, hey, you just started to recognize maybe trends have been going that way for a while. Maybe we'd already been kind of moving that direction. But to me, that was the most defined, whoa, something is different about the way we're treating kids. And since then, I have noticed just less of the you're important, you're the kind of center of the universe kind of mentality toward children. And so I think maybe that's kind of what drove that. But that's, again, it's all a little artificial. All generational discussion, I think, is a little bit artificial because you're layering something on reality. But to me, it kind of works to define a point when there is a before and there's after. But that's we're just talking.
Yes, I mean, but I do think, it is like I do think there are Gen Z that were before that, COVID period. So I think it's like important to like kind of acknowledge that because they're the ones out there now that are like in the military. Those are the ones, because like, so my oldest daughter is like tail end of Gen Z. On the younger edge at 16, but that older edge that graduated before COVID, they're the ones that are like trying to pay rent, trying to buy cars, get insurance, and they're dealing with like, and then, oh, by the way, BlackRock is buying all the houses at a 20% markup from the boomers who just want to make some extra money. So now they can't buy a starter home. So now Gen Z is like just permanently stuck, like looking at home ownership from the outside.
100%. And I guess to me, I would describe that as a problem that late millennials and early Gen Z share. But honestly, at that point, it doesn't really matter. You can call the people before Gen Z or late millennial, you can call them early Gen Z. It's neutral from what we're discussing because the reality is they face a very similar set of challenges on the economic front that obviously we talked about some last week that are brutal. When you look at like 7% interest rates on inflated real estate prices, it makes for a really difficult market to step into. Right?
Well, and I think because you and I, like our view is a little bit myopic, I think, because like back in the 80s, I mean, mortgage rates were ridiculously high too. Like we never saw that because we weren't adults, but not like, so we kind of grew up in like just the golden age of like, of borrowing, I guess.
That's true with all the problems that's created. But I would have to say that back then, in the 80s, when you were, to be fair, looking at double-digit interest rates, so obviously 6-7% you find now is not unique, but there was something about the magic, the alchemy with price plus interest rate plus salary that allowed for home ownership there at a rate that is quite difficult to achieve now. I think.
No, you're absolutely right. And then it's like, I remember going to like when we were out in Monterey, we went to like somebody's house that was like kind of a friend of my wife's family, and they had this like gorgeous 1960s house that like over, had a view into the bay, and it's like, they bought that house in like the 70s. You know what I mean? Like you cannot get into a house like that unless you're like I mean, it's probably like $3 million house, right? And it's just like a regular, 2-story residential home. So yeah, I mean, and then now we see California prices kind of coming to the rest of the country in terms of real estate.
100%. I mean, obviously, when California started to kind of hemorrhage people, they brought all of the money from their sold houses to kind of inflate the rest of the country's market. And I think you stack that with the kind of conglomerates that are going out and picking up houses and flipping them into rentals because it's very predictable income for their investors. You get what we have now, which is when I bought my house in 11, it's like the micro version of what you're describing with your friend's house from the 60s. Like I bought an 11 at this price. I held onto the house, and 10 years later, it's doubled in value, but it's the same pretty small and reasonable house in, I mean, nothing amazing. And so you look at it, and you're like, why? Why did that happen? It feels a little artificial, and it certainly feels like, man, if I had to step back into that house now with functionally my same
Yeah.
income in 2011, I don't think incomes have gone up that much. It would be quite difficult. That would be a huge challenge.
Yeah. So, and I think that, I think you're getting at it. Yeah, there are higher interest rates, but like back in the 70s, 80s, we were still getting, you still could support a family of five on one income, like a blue collar income. So you had like these people that worked in car factories or wherever, non-college degree job. You could support your whole family, live decently, and go on a vacation every summer. And that kind of life, is no longer feasible on one income.
It seemed to work. Whatever. I mean, again, I'm no expert on the economics of it or exactly what the details were, but it did seem to work. A lot of people did it. It seemed like the system kind of worked in a way that it's not right now. But then you just got to wonder, like,
Mhm.
what's got to give? How's it going to kind of straighten out? And again, not an economics expert, but you can't just drop interest rates immediately and for free because then you ramp back up inflation. But we're kind of stuck in a weird cycle right now, and I think it'll work out because I think things tend to work out, but I think it's unclear what it will look like when it does.
Well, yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then, so Peter Turchin is another guy, like Neil Howe, that he studies these big historical trends, and what Turchin points to is what he calls popular immiseration, and that's where like the standard of life of like the average person is declining relative to what it was in the past, and so and he calls this thing a wealth pump. So it's basically like the wealth pump is turned on and it's circulating money to the elites of society, and that's you know, really you're always picking a poison, right? So if the economy is free for innovation, then money will start to centralize. But and then when you start to lock it down, you start to calcify and you kill the innovation. So normally when the thing is free flowing, the wealth is tending to accumulate. So Turchin points to this wealth pump and the popular immiseration for the rise of populist movements, and then what he points to as what gets you out of that is either a war, a civil war, a giant pandemic, or some sort of like redistributional policies. He does cite some examples like where a society was able to offload a lot of its population to immigration as like that's a relief valve, but I don't necessarily think we have that option open to us.
It's it's unfortunate that so many predictions right now and so many of the problems that we see in society look like it's going to take something major to kind of tip things over. I mean, you see it with kind of the state of the institutions as we were discussing about earlier. It's hard for me to imagine a lot of really big bureaucracies fixing themselves internally because it's been my experience working in them for the last 20 years that they just don't. Like they tend to just kind of grow and bloat and stagnate. And you're like, well, the only way you're going to fix that is kind of clean sweep it. But clean sweeps aren't pleasant. And you read, you hear people talk about the same thing with the economy, and frankly, a bunch of other problems. I I just kind of hate that. I mean, it's unfortunate. If it has to happen, it has to happen, and we can't really stop it. But I don't want that kind of unrest. I don't want that kind of I feel like adults allow unrest in our lives, and I'm not interested in something that serious happening. Even if it's necessary, I still don't want that to happen.
Yes.
That's just
Well,
purely
I think,
selfish. But
yeah, you and
uh,
I have a different perspective because, and that's so like I watched Civil War. I had like the flu, and I normally like I'll like quarantine myself in the basement, and I'll just like sit there, get over it. And I watched Civil War, and that thing was freaking intense. Like that was an intense movie. Not least of which because there was like a SEAL that did like the fighting scenes. But like that a big part of that was these journalists that were like wartime journalists, and they were kind of making the point like, hey, like we were trying to document all this stuff overseas so everybody knew that this is a really bad thing that we don't want. This is a really bad road we don't want to go down. And people didn't listen, obviously. So I think, yeah, you and I have a perspective based on our careers that once you open this door, there's a lot of bad things behind the door. So I think, yeah, and then you and I obviously like we're bought into the system, right? Like we own real estate, like we have a vested interest in ensuring the system kind of continues at some level the way it is now. But I think my concern with Gen Z is like we're going to eventually reach a critical mass where they're like we're not like we are we have nothing, the system gives us nothing. we're locked out of
Exactly.
everything.
Nothing to lose, man.
So,
Nothing to
and I
lose.
think once we get to that point, like we're going to see a lot more instability than we've seen.
And the hope is that we don't. The hope is that it's an
Mhm.
adaptive system. It is still a functional system to some degree. The hope is that, by hook or by crook, it can in fact be righted. It can in fact be, brought around so that people can be, included. I think you see this a lot on the international stage. People have, for a lot of years, talked about whether China is going to be, a revisionist power, one that doesn't come to the table and play, or will we be able to kind of bring it to the table and let it play on the world stage as an equal member? And that friction is not all that different than what you see internally, where you have a major and increasingly large block of people who feel they're not kind of part of the system. Well, how do we ensure that the system
Mhm.
adapts to incorporate them to avoid what otherwise is going to be necessary conflict? Like at
Yeah.
a certain point, that will boil over. And,
Uh,
again, did a lot of time in Baghdad, just like you. You see exactly what the city looks like when you take away things like policing and kind of
mhm.
social norms, and it's not good.
Yeah.
Like nobody actually wants that in their city. It's fun to talk about, like, oh, we just need to
Yeah.
burn it all down. Like, man, that actually comes at a really high cost. So you better be really sure it's what you want.
Yes. And to your point, like the hope is, these big systems are like information processing systems. So like democracies and autocracies. So, the hope, right now it looks like, oh, autocracies are ascendant because they can use AI, they can use surveillance to create this like totalitarian state. But the drawback of autocracies is they don't process information as efficiently as democracies. Like there's an incentive structure to like hide uncomfortable and negative news from the top, so that like Xi and Putin are not getting like accurate ground truth about what's happening. Whereas in a democracy, yeah, it's messy, it looks like a train wreck, but the contact between ground truth and the politicians is a little bit there's a little bit more feedback. So the hope is that yes, we can adapt the policies to meet the changing context and situation.
But that is the hope, right? That is the hope. And man, I really genuinely hope whatever the solution is that we do reach one,
Mhm.
because it's just not good, man. It's not anything I'd want to see in my
No,
hometown,
absolutely not.
or anybody's hometown. But man, I think
Well, I mean,
tangented a solid
I
percentage of
think
the show
no,
away.
but see, but that is all. I think that's all setting the table because like we're setting the table for what is the and what I love about generations theory is like the insight that yeah, of course, the generations that follow are different than the ones before because they grew up in a totally different context and environment. So of course they're different, and I think that's what we're kind of laying the case here that like you and I had an upbringing in the 80s and 90s that is totally different than what it is today. Like yes, there are things teenage heartbreak. Yes, there are things that are the same, right? That are timeless. But we're kind of trying to set the table with like the systemic factors that are different now than they may have been in the past.
Oh, you're right. You're right, and that's better. We didn't go on a half show tangent. We actually
We
were
were
carefully
setting
setting the
the
stage for the
table.
rest of our
Yes.
conversation. You know what? That's an
Yes. I
amazing spin on it.
listen.
I love it. And let's just pretend like that
That's
was
what I'm
true.
here for.
Like that's awesome. So to bring us back around, now that the table is set in front of us, so last several weeks we've been going over risk. We really want to talk about how do you calculate risk? How do you understand risk? We wanted to find a way to get out of the military side of things and bring risk calculation into people's everyday lives. And we try to do that through parenting. And so what we want to do is lay out our plan for parenting. And we broke it down into the 5 aspects. We're like, okay, well, physical, mental, spiritual, financial, and social. If a kid succeeds at these kind of 5 things, then we think maybe they'll turn out to be successful humans. And maybe, we ourselves, by improving ourselves along those lines of effort, will become successful as well. And we wanted to look at the risks associated with each. So what's our goal within that line of effort? And then what are the risks that would keep us from reaching that goal? And today we're doing social. So it is important to your point about setting the table. It was important to kind of define what we meant by, what these generations are, what we kind of are using our terminology for in these, because when you look at the social risks associated with trying to socialize your kid right now, it is critical to understand kind of where they fit into that and what risks they face. But let me set the table a little further. I'm going to put out our shrimp fork, and I'm going to say that to me, the basic decision on kid socialization as a parent, the number one thing I wrestle with is I know that to socialize my kid, I need to kind of integrate them into society. I need to find a way to integrate them into society. But the conflicting pressure there is that I also know I need to protect them from aspects of that socialization that I think will be overall detrimental to their lives. And so to me, the essential decision, the essential, math problem of, socializing my kids is that kind of dichotomy. I want them to be socialized, but I don't want them to be socialized maybe with all the worst parts of it. And I think if you could master that balance there, then to me, that's how you succeed. What is that? Is that decent paradigm? What do you think? How do you do it?
Yes. I mean, I think that's, yeah, I think when we're talking socialization and social risks, yeah, I think I see like there's a lot of overlap between physical, mental, spiritual risks within social. But yeah, I think
For sure.
that is the dichotomy, the tension that we're trying to navigate. Like what is, um, what is too much and what is too little. It's the same thing with like, teaching them to be assertive, right? Like you don't want them to be passive wallflowers. You don't want them to be aggressive bullies. You want them to be assertive and like stick up for themselves and their friends. But um, it's very hard sometimes to be like, what's too passive? What's too aggressive? Like, what's the sweet spot? So yeah, I agree with your like foundational kind of framing there.
The basic frame. I'm add one wrinkle to it. And the one wrinkle that I found as a parent is that, well, what I'm actually trying to do is socialize my kids to be functional adults. And so the one wrinkle that I see as we suss out, okay, well, how much do I expose them to this and how much do I protect them from that, is that how much does child socialization, how much does the construct of kids in society actually mirror adult socialization anyway? And so when I'm socializing them, am I really setting them up to be successful kids or am I setting up to be successful adults? And what I mean, let me pick that part just a touch, because I think when I look at the school environment, so we're homeschoolers. We homeschool our kids. We've always homeschooled our kids. And one of the reasons we homeschooled our kids is because when we grew up in school, we felt that the environment we were socialized to in school didn't actually reflect the real world in any meaningful way anyway. It's like, as I became an adult, I'm like, well, the idea that me as an 11-year-old was surrounded by nothing but other 11-year-olds and also one authority figure who was a senior. So there was no real bridge between us talking to, you would never be friends with a 13-year-old when you're in school. Oh man, look, 2 years up. Are you kidding? Certainly not 2 years down. They're not worth talking to at all. And so is that homogenous peer group with authoritarian leader, is that even a realistic thing? Is that even a paradigm that you want your kids to kind of plug into? And so that's the other wrinkle for me. If that makes sense.
Yes, and I yeah, all three of my kids go to a public school, and some of that's economic, some of that's like we don't have the my wife and I don't assess we have the the capability to homeschool, um, and some of that's like hey, like we both went to homeschool, or sorry, we both went to a public school, so they're going to public school. Like I should say, like I'm not a teacher, I'm not a professional educator, right? I've taught at universities, but in terms of like understanding childhood development, I'm not an expert, right? I'm just a parent. But yes, but what I think it's hard not to look at the current setup and see, okay, this system was designed for an industrial age where we're like getting people ready to work in factories. So there was like this very regimented thing. And then obviously parents are at work, so they need their kids to be somewhere from set hours. So if you're looking at it from the metric of like, is this the most efficient and like effective way to like, probably effective is the better one, like the more effective way to like teach young humans, like it's probably not. But I don't want to like, I don't want to take away from like, I believe that like there's a lot of teachers that are there that are like really like trying to do their best. And they're in the arena, they're in the trenches, and we have to give them like respect for doing that, right? But they're in a system that is like every other institutional system, is having a hard time orienting itself to all of the dynamic changes in our environment that are happening one after another after another.
That makes sense. And I do not, one, I'm also not an expert on anything except applied parenting. I think maybe I'm a qualified expert on that because I've done it for a long time, but I have no formal education in this. I don't want to bash on the school system. It's got problems, but I don't want to immediately just say, yeah, teachers suck and the school system sucks. That's not, to me, what I'm even trying to get at with this. I mean, like, is the model of kids in one grade sitting in a grade together, let's assume it was perfectly executed and 100%, they're absolutely being taught all the right things and high quality education. Let's assume it's all good. Is that even still preparing them for real life? Like, is that even a model that anybody lives in, unless you're in jail or something? Like, there's no other time, I think, when you have this homogenous group of people, like 12-year-olds, for example, low point in humanity, 100% believe that middle school is the low point of humanity. And, and you're just surrounded by other 12-year-olds and 12-year-olds defining with like prison yard rules, social structure, 12-year-old rules, just crushing each other's egos. Like, is that even like am I socializing my kids for real life, or am I just kind of setting them aside somewhere so they can grow up and then come out of it with the scars that they
Yeah. So, I
got?
mean, I think like if we're just talking public school, like private schools, obviously you're going to get like different advantages. You're going to get different, teacher to student ratios, and you're looking at a Montessori or one of those things. You're going to kind of get a different result there. But yes, public school, same age. Like, does that reflect regular life? Absolutely not. It's just it's designed for, okay, these people are roughly at the same developmental level. They're roughly prepared for X, Y, and Z. So I mean, I think what you're getting at, like what you're getting in school is, you know, the quote unquote socialization, your ability to navigate different relationships. Like, do you have to be in a school to do that? Absolutely not. But I think like you're getting that there. You're getting the ability to, okay, talk to the teacher this way, talk to the student this way. I'm out on the playground. I'm dealing with these, X, Y, and Z relationships. So, um, like, does it reflect real life? Like, I mean, not really, but in the sense of like, I mean, does football reflect like combat? No, but it's like an attempt, it's an attempt to like, we're bounding the
Yeah, yeah.
rules. You're going to innovate and you're going to like perform under these conditions, and it'll roughly scale. You'll get enough here to like carry on.
No, that's fair. You're right. I mean, and again, I'm not an expert at this, of course, but you're right. Maybe it's enough of an approximation to say, well, okay, you're sitting here. I hand you a piece of paper. You have to be quiet and carefully fill out your piece of paper and then turn it in with some kind of quality, which isn't actually all that different than a lot of jobs. But so maybe there is some similarity there, sadly. But also, you do, even if you're all 12-year-olds, still have different flavors of 12-year-olds. And so you are working out as peers, okay, we got to solve problems with this sort of person. I got to solve problems with this sort of person. I still maintain that those problems are super different feeling in school because of the artificiality of that construct. Like, nobody acts like that in the real world that I know of. Like, when you're an adult, there are things that kind of happen in particularly those adolescent years that nobody ever do, but there is still value to interacting with them. And I will say, as a homeschool parent, that is a challenge to look at kind of the other end of the spectrum. Okay, how do I ensure that my kids do get enough touch points with enough different kinds of people to ensure that they do have the ability to understand, like, okay, sometimes in life you just got an asshole, and this is how you have to figure out how to deal with an asshole in the constraints of the environment that you're working in. So yeah, I mean, obviously there's challenges there, but yeah, I still have kind of a bad taste in my mouth when I think about the idea that, like, well, this is preparing kids for real life. Let's sit quietly for eight
Yeah.
hours and
Yeah. And I'm definitely not a fan. Like, I mean, you see behind me, like, I love to read. I love to write. I could, like, a school environment is great for me. It's beautiful. Like, I love it. I love to learn. Um, but that's not like a normal, particularly most boys, that's not a normal thing, right? Like, they, they want like the default boy wants to freaking be moving their body, like getting after it, like throwing stones, like looking for frogs, like so, if we're trying to contour a teaching method to the inclination of like the child developmentally, it's probably going to look differently than sitting in line getting a lecture. Like that's not um a good, an effective delivery mechanism. I totally agree with you. I think there's like everything, we're picking our poisons. So if you're homeschooling, I'm sure that you have like, you got scouts, you got like club teams for sports, you got various activities where there's enough like human to human interaction that they're getting that the same socialization they'd get in a public school.
that's the hope. And actually, quick sales pitch for the success of homeschooling and those sorts of things in case people, just kind of wonder what that looked like. One of the things I love the most about it is that most homeschool groups tend to be age neutral because you're going to have all the families getting together with all of their kids, right? So you're going to have old kids, young kids, a big mix of kids. One of my favorite things about seeing homeschool socialization is that my kids play up and down a lot. And it has a lot less to do with, this one 9-year-old, maybe he's a little slower to develop. He's actually a good match for my 12-year-old, or, the 7-year-old over here plays with a 4-year-old over there. And you'll see kind of age spread groups work out. And you'll also see older kids step in to mediate younger kids stuff a lot more because it's just kind of a forcing function. Like that heterogeneous group, to me, socially actually works remarkably well in a way that in a public school scenario or in a school scenario at all, you're going to have your fifth grader who's like 4 years behind, or four, but a year and a half behind everybody else developmentally. And he's always going to be that kind of little wimpy shrimp kid. And he becomes, the victim of sort of the pack mentality of other people of exactly the same age. So I see less of that. But again, my data size or sample size is only what it is, but as one of my
No,
favorite parts
I
about it.
definitely like that a lot, and I think there was a movement, years ago. I don't know how strong it is, where it was like you hold your kid back a year so they're like older in the school, and then they're getting that like cumulative advantage of being older. But I really like the mixed age group that you described, because then you can you're able to the older kids can lead, and then the younger kids are learning like how to follow, and then ultimately like be leaders of their own. So I definitely like, I think heterogeneous, age is a nice thing if you can do it. So yeah, definitely, it sounds great.
If you can do it. And again, it's got all its own challenges. I don't say that one solution is better than the other. It's what we've gone with, and so I'm naturally going to look for ways to maximize the effectiveness of what we've gone with. It's funny you talk about holding kids back a year because in the youth sports, like youth football, at least in particular, maybe it's the same in other sports. That's just where my experience lies. There is such a huge
Mm,
advantage for a kid who is a year older than everybody
mhm.
else on the team because it becomes this kind of upward spiral where if you're the biggest and most developed kid, then you will naturally become one of the kids that coaches
Yeah.
focus on the most because you'll be one of the talent position kids and out around the periphery. And that tends to stack year to year because in the next year you walk in and not only are you still the biggest kid in your age, but you have had a year of
Mhm.
full coach time kind of developing you. And so there is a huge push towards baby's birth certificate manipulation. There is a lot of incentive for people to come in and stack that birth certificate so that, let's say the cutoff is 1 August for everybody before 1 August plays up and
Mhm.
everybody after 1 August plays down. A lot of incentive to move those dates
Yeah.
around. And you could probably say that gets into a lot of the worst of what we've talked about with youth sports. You're
Yeah.
like, come on, man, you're missing the whole point of this. But it's just a funny little anecdote that you just shake your
Yeah.
head and you see that's very related to
I
what you're
think
talking about.
Malcolm Gladwell made that point in one of his books. Like, he analyzed hockey, like professional hockey players in Canada, and there was something where there was a correlation between like they were all born in the beginning of the year. So I think that he was describing the same phenomenon in hockey.
It's a, I mean, it makes sense, right? It should be any sport. And honestly, it's probably the case in school from a social standpoint as well. I think generally speaking, there's an advantage to being more developed instead of being less developed, like all other things considered equal. So that would lead into kind of a weird arms race. Like, well, then would we hold them back
Right.
2 years? Would there be
It's
7-year-olds in kindergarten? Because, they get that much more advantage, but it's, I don't know. I'm not
yeah.
sure. It's like kids with mustaches in fifth grade. It's gone too
Yeah.
far. It's gone too far.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I don't know, man. So how do we break that down then? How do we walk all this back to our topic, tie it up and say, okay, so if our risk, the fundamental risk calculation is how much do we plug them in? How much do we protect them? Then you and I are obviously doing exactly opposite approaches almost. And so how do we mitigate within those two? Like, how do you, as a public school dad, mitigate that kind of, or navigate that math problem that we're describing?
Yeah. I think so. He's gonna socialize my. I'm thinking of my son in particular. Like, but all three of the kids, like, they're gonna get what they get in school. There's definitely, there's dangers that you get in school. There's bullying, there's cliques, there's exclusion, there's all those things, and then there's, then we're talking like the physical realm, and then the digital realm, and like where do you draw the line there? So With those, like, I just want to real quick, just hit the Jonathan Haidt, like what he is recommending, again. And it's like, and I'm super excited because our public school just put out that they are, banning phones in schools next year. Which I was like super, I've been like emailing the superintendent. He's like not answering my emails at all. I'm like, I'm just a crank. Like, I'm the crank parent that's like, I'm emailing him like articles like, hey, superintendent, take a look at this, please, when you get a chance. But they're actually enacting policy, so no phones at school, which I'm super stoked about. But Jonathan Haidt's 4 key reforms, right? No smartphones before high school, so either get him a Gizmo watch or get him a flip phone. No social media before age 16, phone free schools, and then more free play and independence. So I think that last one definitely gets to, trying to answer your question. Definitely, I want to encourage the kids to like play without direct mediation of adults, and then without devices as much as possible. So they're actually like participating, they're playing games, they're swimming, they're riding their bikes places, and really just trying to give them as much leash as, you know, society today will let them have, right? Recognizing that they may not be able to get away with what we got away with when we were kids in terms of ranging. There's no like stand by me going on where you're like, walking 10 miles and camping out by yourself, unfortunately. But yeah, so I think trying to monitor, recognizing that we tend to undervalue the risk digitally, and then like, we overweight the physical risk, like trying to meter those effectively, I think is something that my wife and I work on doing, and really just kind of get them off of devices as much as we can, and just encourage them to do physical play.
No, so obviously we brought those 4 points up a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about physical and mental risks, and to your point earlier, they do spill over into a lot of these categories, which is great because I hadn't really thought of the free play aspect of that as being such an important social developmental tool, an important way to kind of mitigate that risk of, well, how are they ever going to learn how to solve conflicts if we solve every conflict for them? But you're right. I mean, being forced to be out there and kind of work through that. Again, I would argue, particularly in a heterogeneous group, is huge, and it absolutely teaches kids a lot, and I think helps prepare them for real life, which that's real life, right? You're going to have a guy 20 years older than you on your team. You're going to have a guy 10 years younger than you. You're going to have a gal doing this. And you're going to have to work through those problems together without appealing to some higher authority, or your higher authority is going to get irritated and fire you pretty quick. Man, what a huge win that your school has gone to
Yeah.
device
Oh yeah.
free. Like, to me, that's just the right answer. Like a
Yeah.
110% the correct answer. I don't see any conflicting or any valuable, any worthwhile opinion that's worth considering to the
it's like,
contrary on that one. Like,
yeah,
no devices in school.
I'm an adult. Like, I'm a grown man that my brain matured before cell phones. And it's hard for me, a grown adult, to not be distracted by a cell phone. So what is that doing to a 16-year-old girl, or boy, for that matter? So yeah, I just think like it's just the data is pretty clear when we study these things, and we're kind of putting learning and these digital devices together. The learning is pretty clear there. But yeah, so and to your point about the different groups, the 8 different age groups, like I definitely noticed like with my youngest child, like she is much more kind of like, in obviously there's probably some bias, right, of mine, but like in her pre-K group, yeah, like in
Maybe a
her
little.
pre-K group, like she's like very like doing very well. And I think it's because she's like having to fight with, a 12-year-old and a 16-year-old at home. Like she's like learning from them. She's like interacting with them all day long. So that kind of changes what she brings to like the pre-K. She's got like more like seasoning. And I think that's what you get in those heterogeneous groups.
Somebody taught her how to make the shank. She didn't have to figure it out over
Yes,
herself. She already knew how
she's
to
an
make the prison
expert.
shank.
Yeah,
Right?
she absolutely is.
I would love to talk more about digital socialization in a minute, because I think it is a parallel kind of line of effort to all of this that is also enormous. And frankly, my approach is different than it is on the rest, so it's worth considering. But I want to throw out one more controversial kind of subject on this, and I think I have been promoting heterogeneous peer interaction, right? This whole show is like, this is really awesome. It's a valuable piece of homeschooling. I'm gonna almost contradict myself here and throw this out. I'm probably gonna get paid for it. I actually think that in the public school system or the private school, the large scale school system, that separation of boys and girls actually promotes better education. I think that boys learn better with boys and girls learn better with boys, and the learning methods to the two are different enough that it would be more valuable. You would get more value out of separating them for the bulk of their education than combining them. And that's fairly controversial, and it's almost the opposite of the heterogeneous thing that I just said. But I think to me, it's different. And I actually think if we looked at it, we might find that it actually worked a lot better.
Yeah, and
What do you think?
I've even seen where people talk about like just having having the girls be like, I think the boys are just developing later. So I think there's almost like a year delay between them as they're kind of growing. So the girls are just more sophisticated, they're more better able to handle content before the boys are. And obviously like the hope is that they catch up at some point. I'm not sure. From conversations with my wife, I'm not sure if I've ever caught up with her maturity wise yet. But I mean, maybe, a couple years. Yeah.
It's in the future.
Yeah. We'll
You're getting
see.
there. You're sorted.
But, yeah, I mean, and I definitely like, I don't know any of the data on that, but I definitely think like schools, especially schools that have like uniform codes, like I've never been in a school like that, but like that seems like you would be eliminating a lot of like nonsense that like, can distract kids. So I don't know for sure like what is better on that, but I think it does make sense that you can tailor the content more directly to the maturity level and kind of where your audience is at.
And the style and the delivery and the method of learning, right? The content, yes, to an extent, maybe you could tailor the content too, but certainly the method of delivery. But to me, I think one of the reasons is not actually a contradiction to say, hey, heterogeneous groups, you need that, you need to be exposed to that. But also, I think that, sex separated education is actually better. I think it produces a better product. I think the reason it's not contradictory is because I would say that there is a window of time when the mixing of the two, the genders, boys and girls together in school, this kind of hormonal soup that happens from, let's say, like 11, 12 through the end of high school, like that window right there, aside from the developmental differences in like speed. So you're right. Girls totally mature faster. I see it with my kids. It's painfully obvious, and you see it across everywhere. Painfully obvious. But aside from that, it is, to me, 100% the case that when you are going through adolescence, you are hormonally challenged to pay attention to anything else other than kind of what's going on around you with the opposite sex. And I think removing that distraction actually is to the betterment of both. I think that boys working together with girls around tend to behave differently than boys in a group together with no girls around, and vice versa. And so I think the quality of girls' education and the qualities of boys' education would both be improved by just simply separating them during that period. And I know that's super controversial. I don't think that the quality of education needs to be any different. Of course, obviously, I want everybody to come out with an equal quality education, but I think that pretending that there's not an infinitely distracting thing about having those all mixed together at that time is just foolish to me. I mean, I think it's just denying reality. Like, what do you
I
think?
mean, I could definitely see the utility of that. I mean, I think I'm always looking at it through the paradigm of like, well, this is what I did in my experience and it worked fine. But yeah, if we're looking at like what is the best, if we have this end goal of like disseminating this knowledge, what's the best way to deliver that? Then yeah, like I can see separating by sex being helpful to just make the content easier to deliver to the audience. But I think
It removes a
yeah,
distraction. It removes a critical distraction.
yeah, I just don't know how. I don't know how that would be enacted in a public school. I'm not like sure how. I don't know. Like that would be a big policy change. I think that would take. I could see it in private schools. I don't know if we're going to get there with public schools.
I mean, I'm just a podcaster, Adam. I don't have to think through the details of how to enact this stuff. We just have to point out problems and then provide these pie in the
I
sky
like it.
solutions to
Yes,
fix
I like
things.
it.
Like, I mean, I'm, I'm half serious there, but I just, to me, even the recognition that, hey, maybe a couple of periods a day, we kind of split it up and we kind of, work through these in sort of a
Mhm.
same sex environment because there are things we need to cover. Um, and then we're just going to get a little more
Mhm.
quality out of kind of separating them. To me, it's at least valuable to consider. I think you do see it in
Mhm.
some private schools, of course, in particular. Um, I can just think off the top of my head of a
Mhm.
bunch of all girls schools, but I know there are also all boys schools. I, I haven't dug into the data enough to know, qualitatively how that's
Yeah,
going in terms of like, do those kids perform better? Do those kids don't know?
yeah,
Just seeing a bunch of, crappy movies that focus on boarding schools that are probably not reflective of any kind of
yeah.
reality or truth. So
Dead Poets
I,
Society.
that,
Yeah,
100%.
yeah.
So many classics. But to me, just looking at my kids
Mhm.
don't learn the same way. But there are a lot of trends when we're teaching the boys that, teaching girl is quite different. And there are a lot of trends that we see across the homeschool group that are similarly divided that way. And I think that the approaches are different enough that it's worth considering separating them. And then the reality of mixing them all together is that I think the distraction is, uh, and the negatives that you get from that mixing are more detrimental than the benefit you get from, any kind of integrated heterogeny, that might set them up for
Mhm.
the future. So I don't know, that's in a nutshell what I'm going with.
All right. Okay, I'll buy that. All right. So what else do we need to cover when we talk about this? Like we haven't. So
Digital.
yeah,
Oh, digital,
and so I
digital,
think,
digital.
and the issue with that is a lot of their socialization is going on online. Like a lot of their how they interact is online. So it's a double-edged sword. You on one hand, this thing has the potential to obviously fracture their attention span, give them body image issues, um, make them kind of like addicted to this like dopamine thing that they're getting from the devices. But on the other hand, they're connecting with their friends and they're like socializing that way. So it's hard to find the happy medium between those 2 points.
I I'm not even going to say this sword's double edged. Like I think it's a single edged sword the bad way. I think that the idea that it's necessary to have a digital component to socialization for kids is inherently flawed. I know,
At,
I
at
get where
what
I think you're
yeah.
going, which is
At
it is
what
part of the
age?
world.
Yeah. At
It
what
is
age
part
are
of the
you
world.
breaking that?
I don't break it until they leave home. Like to me, it is straight up. You can have email account access. Like there's a degree of like email back and forth because I think it's necessary for certain amounts of, email your family, this and that, but it's all on a public computer. It's all on something that everybody can see and is open. But in terms of like maintaining this digital network of friends that you can socialize with or hanging out with your friends doing this, like we're at zero. We're at 100%, like nothing on that. I just see no value to it. To me, I think the quality socialization that I'm looking for comes from face to face stuff. And so we do promote and enable and even force a lot of face to face engagement through extracurriculars and through, volunteer work, sports, all the stuff we've talked about a million times. But to me, I I mean, we're looking at risk, right? We're looking at separate the kid from the social system to protect them from things, integrate them into the social system everybody is using. To me, and my happy medium is all the way. There's no medium to me. Like, nope, zero. The risk and the cost, like known costs plus risks that I assess of allowing them access to that are 100% offset. I mean, they 100% offset any value that I see in it, which to me is negligible. Now that I think to your point, I grew up without it. And so to me, digital media is a way to keep in touch with people who I met face to face. It is a tool for me to maintain contacts, to maintain socialization that I built in another apparatus. And so you could argue, and maybe there's an argument here that I'm totally missing, that the younger generation who is building contacts through digital means, that is the primary means of interaction. It's not just an extension of face to face. Maybe, my kids are being disadvantaged because they don't have the ability to make that huge global network of, whatever like-minded digital friends. But I'm just a hard no. I don't know, man. But obviously we feel a little
Yeah,
different
I
on this.
mean,
What do you think?
I think that's definitely like an easy play for the homeschooling. Like I think you can get away with that because they're going to make friends in the neighborhood. They're going to make friends through the various physical, meet space, MEAT space, engagements you're doing. And then you could
Be a
set up,
great app.
like, okay, hey, if we can't ride bikes to each other's house, like you can get dropped off here or whatever. You can you can do that. I don't know if that policy is going to be realistic for a lot of families though. Like that's and maybe it is. Like I'm open to it. Like I have a lot of respect for the Amish and the Mennonites and like how they approach technology. But like I don't know if this approach is going to fly with like the majority of people, or if we need to find like a little bit, a middle path.
Man, you could totally be right. And we do use buttons, zippers. We use all of that sort of technology. So our line was a little right of the Amish. So just to like be totally upfront, we are fans of much
Nice.
technology. But I I think to me that the argument that like, well, you might not be able to get away with that, like, what does that mean other than, well, they'll be exposed to it because their friends have it? I agree with you on that 100%. And honestly, our kids are. Our kids go to campouts. Our kids do things. They get exposed to it. To me, that's always well, you can eat that when you're at somebody else's house. You can have all the soda you want at grandma's house. If I don't have it in my house, then 90% of the time it'll be all right. Therefore, nutritionally, you will have the benefits that come from 90% of your life not consuming that. So you're going to get the 10%. You're going to get it. I can't avoid that. To me, that is still not as damaging as it would be if I let it all the time. So that's our basic philosophy, right? You're never going to prevent it all the way, but you're going to try your best. But why do you think you say you can't get away with it? Like, what
So
does that mean? Like, you could
so
get
I
away with
think,
it in your house,
so
making syrup.
with this digital realm, we run into the age old problem. Like, do we fix things at the individual level, or do we like address them at the systemic level with policy changes? Right. So with phones in schools, we run into the, you know, tragedy of the commons style problem of, well, if your child doesn't have a phone and everyone else does, then they're paying this social penalty. So we're going to take phones away from everybody across the board. So we're like coming in with like the systemic level policy change. With when I think of the digital realm with my kids, like, my 12-year-old, like he doesn't have social media. He doesn't have, he doesn't have a phone, but he's got a iPod, that is connected to the internet, and he will use that. Like when he's playing Fortnite, he will talk to his friends. Right. So, in that sense, like, so, the cost would be like, maybe your kids aren't playing video games talking to other kids. Maybe they're not playing video games at all. Maybe they're, just playing the video games. I don't know. But I think when I think of my 12-year-old, like that's how he's mainly socializing online. It gives them, he can connect with other kids in a way that's not, in the physical world. And that will bleed into his connection when he's back with them in the physical world. And then with the daughter, 16-year-old, they're just using it in a different way than we use. And so the challenge is like, how do we, as parents, like, how do we adjudicate like a technology use that we didn't grow up with? And that's hard.
That we
He,
feel is inappropriate. How do we say when it's good
yeah.
versus
And
bad?
so I think, I, I would tend to lean towards your approach. I think like the costs are probably like worse than the gains, but where you put that line, I don't know. Like, I don't know if it's leaving the house is the right line for that, or I guess every other family is going to be their own canopy commander, right? So, if you're, I mean, if
That's
your
true for sure.
daughters are not, coming to you saying like their lives are over if they don't have, social media, then, I would continue mission with that. But like, um, I think we've tried to find like this is not too much, this is not too middle, but you're absolutely right. Like there are, discernible costs that I try to, educate her, the oldest daughter about, like, hey, this is like a plate of wasps that you're eating, like you have to like understand that. And she is like coming to that conclusion herself. But then, we're at the line of like, where do I give her own agency? And then when do I come over top as the parent and be like, listen, like you just don't know right now. You can hate me. That's cool. I don't care. But in 5 or 10 years, you'll be like, yeah, this is probably the right approach.
Man, that is the challenge with so many decisions in parenting. Like, when do I
Mhm.
fight my kids on something and to either let them do what they want, or, okay, you can do this because it's just not worth the fight that I want to have with you over this, or when do I put my foot down and say absolutely not? Um, and that's a challenge, man, for sure. And honestly, I've gone one way with it. You've gone a slightly different way. I think we're mostly on the
Mhm.
same page, but cooking, different degrees on it. But honestly, hey man, like you said, everybody's a can be commander. And so I don't want to ever sound like I know all the right answers and this is what
Yeah.
it must be. There are some of these things where I do feel like, and I'm pretty sure that's right, but I could be dead wrong. And the reality is none of us are going to know the return on our parenting investment for about
Mhm.
15 to 20 years. And then we can do a surf and turf reunion show and we'll come back and be like, well, Adam, I tell you what, man, I was so
Yes.
wrong. Like, I can't even believe how wrong I was about so many of the things that I thought. But that is one of the joys of parenting is, even if you have lots of kids, you really only do it once. So it's really hard to course correct when you're not sure if your decisions got you where you wanted to go.
Yeah.
That is a unique challenge of
Yes, it
parenting.
absolutely is. Yeah, go ahead.
But I just want to ask you though, I did. So you were celebrating the fact that phones are disallowed in school. Like that, yes, awesome, no phones in school. But at the same time you'd have be uncomfortable putting your foot down for the same exact policy at your house. Like what why? What is
Be
the line? What's the
because
what's the difference?
I do think there it it comes down to like when are you letting your children um get used to this different medium that they're going to also have to navigate as adults. So, you're make
The stove thing, the hot stove, right? You know
yeah.
they're gonna touch the stove, but you want them to touch it in a way that you could still kinda control and, like,
So,
maybe won't burn too bad.
yeah,
Is
so
that
I
kinda what you
mean
mean?
like so you're making the calculation that like they don't need any of this stuff until they leave the house. And then they'll figure it out. And that I mean that probably is going to work fine. Um we see like our daughter socializing with social media and phones. So we are allowing that to you know proceed at like a moderate level that and it's a constant battle, right? Like it's a constant like this thing is like attached to your arm.
Yeah. Line
Um
step.
so
Pull,
it's like,
push.
hey, put that thing away, like sit down and read a book for 20 minutes, like, go for a run. That's a constant challenge. So like the hope is that like she is going to kind of develop her own self-discipline and be able to meter her own conduct. Does that always happen? Absolutely not. Is it like a train wreck? Like a lot of times? Yes. Is there, has she, you know, has she had challenges dealing with the digital environment? Like, absolutely. But like, again, like I see that as another facet of like, when kids are playing and one's being a jerk and they're trying to adjudicate that situation without an adult, I see that same thing on the digital realm. It's just where do we introduce it, right? And so that's why something like Jonathan Haidt's proposal is like, hey, this is not like give your kid a smartphone at age 12 and they can, they have a Pornhub account. It's like, okay, let's try to set this at like a
Although they
reasonable
will, if they
yes.
want.
So let's set this at like a reasonable age somewhere in the middle. But, do I think that your approach is going to have like a better general outcome for a human? Yes, absolutely. I just don't think that would necessarily like fly in my household.
Oh, that makes sense, man. And I completely understand the value of basically saying, I want a couple of years of moderation on this tool that I know you're going to have for the rest of your life. I want the ability to kind of help you come to terms with it while you're still here. And I can help you before you kind of just sink or swim when you leave. Um, that makes sense. And actually, that's a pretty solid argument, on behalf of kind of the approach taken. My only counter to that would be, I think as our brains develop, we become better equipped to deal with those sorts of
Mhm.
tools anyway, or at least to become less
Yeah,
addicted to them. And I don't know that that's true, but I do think that if you start drinking
right.
at whatever age,
You're like,
it's
yeah,
better for you than if you started drinking 5 years earlier. Like,
right.
it's
Yeah,
still not great, but it's better. And by just delaying it, I hope that we're achieving that kind of mitigation of long-term damage. I don't know. Again, I could be dead wrong. Possibly moderation would have more value than,
right. Yeah.
delayed
So yeah,
introduction.
the whole
But
it'd be like
we'll just
the
find out.
European model, like like the kid has like the little bottle, the little glass of wine at dinner, or whatever it is. Like you're just making not a big deal, but yeah, but I do, yeah. I mean, I do think I think the longer you can wait for everything, the better. The more developed their brains are, the more their impulse control is developed, the better outcome you're going to find. So, I'm definitely in agreement with you there.
And honestly, as with so many of these other issues, man, we're just taking swings. We're getting the pitches we get.
Yeah.
We're taking swings. We're seeing like,
Yeah.
that didn't connect, or just I just I just got myself out. But man, no easy
No,
answers on these things.
absolutely
No
not.
easy answers for sure. And I wish obviously we did, that we just knew what the right answers were and we could do it and be fine. But the reality is, even if we did, one of the joys of parenting is I don't think the solution would work from one to the next. Like many of my this really worked policies have completely failed with the
Yeah.
next kid, and we've had to go back to the drawing board and rework it. So the nature of humans and kind of the complexity we all bring, and then kind of the ever-changing system as you introduce more humans into the system, even just as small as a family, do mean that rarely are we going to find, solutions that
Mhm.
just work across the board. Just one of the challenges, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did we cover all of social risk?
No,
Do we
I
think
mean,
we did we lay it out well enough?
talked about it. Definitely scratched the surface on it, but yeah, it's something we can definitely look at returning to later. But yeah, so for next week, we're going to do a book. We are going to talk about Sebastian Junger's Tribe, which is a nice short read. And we'll kind of go through, we'll hit, some high points, and we can kind of talk through like kind of some of our favorite sections in that book.
That makes sense. Yeah, that sounds good. You assigned it to me,
Mm,
professor style here a couple of weeks ago. I read through it. I'm going to give it another read before our next show just to make sure I'm kind of fresh on it. And
yeah.
I'd love to talk about it, man. That's good.